Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about one of the most amazing moments in my life. And I've had some very interesting moments, I must tell you. But this is really quite fascinating. Around 2005, I was contacted by a librarian in Edison, New Jersey, and at that time I was working with the Thomas Edison Menlo Park Museum. And she told me that she had a connection with a astronaut by the name of Captain Commander Polanski in NASA, and he was going to be commanding a shuttle trip in the not too distant future. And it was suggested that perhaps I could send something that was dealing with Thomas Edison or history up on the shuttle. And I did a little thinking about it, quite a bit of thinking about it, actually, trying to figure out what do you send into space? I mean, it's not something that you look in books and you find a great deal of information on. And so I thought about it and decided that perhaps one of the best things to send into space would be something of which there is more than one. For the specific reason of the chance of a disaster or problem in space, and then that artifact is lost for eternity. You don't want to do that. And so I thought about it for a while, and I said, what about a pencil with Edison's name on it? They're all over the place. You see them here, there, and everywhere. And collectors have them, dealers have them, etc., etc., etc. So I went to a dear friend of mine. Name was Charlie Hummel. He had one. He gave it to me. He said, "This is your pencil now." I said, "Thank you." And so I wrapped it up, talked to the librarian, wrote an article about it at the time, and sent it to NASA. And I was all excited about this because I wanted to do a whole thing about Edison's pencil. And what I thought about Edison's pencil was this, that Edison used his pencil to write in his notebooks with new ideas at his organized research laboratory. And he was the creator of the organized research laboratory to a degree. And the greatest organized research laboratory was in space. This was the new laboratory. This was the new world of investigation and thought and ideas. So I sent it off. And that was all well and good. Several months later, I received a phone call from NASA. You don't get phone calls from NASA very often. And what they said was, "Mr. Stanley, we do not send organic materials into space, and a pencil is organic. You have to come up with something else, and it has to be sent today because we can't accept it any later than anything sent today." I'm like, holy cow. I got to think of something real quick. I called. There was a guy who lived across the street from the museum. I called him and I said, "Let's think. What can we send into space? And I don't want to send something that's one of a kind." We talked and talked and talked. And finally I said, I have something at home that would probably work. It's a recording of Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt was the first president to fly. And so I said, why don't we make him the first president symbolically on record to go into space? So I shouldn't say ran, I drove home. I got the record wrapped it up and we sent it by overnight to NASA in a case. And so that was all well and done. And then a few months later, that shuttle mission took off. And I was so proud that actually that recording made by Edison, made by Theodore Roosevelt, was flying in space, circling the Earth. Something Theodore Roosevelt would have been so excited about, I know. And, well, that mission was successful. It came back to Earth. And a month or so later, I got a phone call saying, Commander Polanski is coming back to present you with the piece that went to space. And so we were all excited. Cameras were flying and all this other stuff. And people were taking pictures here, there, and everywhere. And he presented me with the cylinder that had gone to space. Theodore Roosevelt had gone around the world. I mean, can you think of a more Theodore Rooseveltian thing to do than go into space? Because if he was alive today, you know he would have liked that. So, Commander Polanski presented me with the cylinder. It was wrapped because it had to go to space and had special wrapping. And then he looked at me and winked. And he said, I took the pencil with me too. And so he had taken Edison's pencil. And I thought that was just grand. And you know something, it was a whole big document made up talking about the fact that these items had flown in space. And those are existent. You can go see them at the Menlo Park Museum and see that record. That's really amazing, isn't it? And I thought about that, and I'm very proud of that. I'm glad I thought of Theodore Roosevelt, because you know something? I could have sent up a brick or something nondescript, but the individual who was President of the United States, who flew in a plane for the first time, deserved to go into space. Now, granted, he wasn't the first president to go into space symbolically. Jimmy Carter was on records, and the two Discovery missions. Richard Nixon called the moon in 1969. And of course, John F. Kennedy encouraged everyone to go to space. But Theodore Roosevelt, who predated them all by many, many years, flew on the Space Shuttle. And I can't think of anything greater than that, and something that I am tremendously proud of. Because no matter what happens in time or space or history or our lives, it happened, it was done, and it took place. So, Teddy, you did it. You did even more than you ever dreamed you could. You flew around the Earth in space on your record, made by Edison. I'm very happy that I was able to make that happen.